And I think the best way to engage with this is just to just jump in and see what VR, AR, XR is all about. I want to know who in the room feels like they're at a 101, just jumping in, just showing up level on this. Okay, and then hands down. And who feels anxious about all of this tech stuff? Okay, good to know. And then who's ready for an advanced discussion? A few of you are ready for an advanced discussion. Okay, so I feel like there is a way we can walk the line here and do a little bit of both. I'm going to let folks on the panel take 5 minutes each to introduce themselves, what their projects are, and to say something about what they'd very much like to talk about today with all of you. Kathy, would you like to start us off, or would you like someone else to go first?
Sure. Actually, I'd like to start with Matt and come this direction, just because I'm hoping I might get some slides up if it's possible.
Okay, let's go with Matt.
Sure. So I'm Matt Henderson, and I'm an artist, and how I got involved with OpenSignal is some of the leadership here was overseeing a project that was a public art project that went on Pioneer Courthouse Square in downtown Portland. So I was building this art installation in their garage, which has now been converted into another classroom. So that's how I got to know everyone here. And part of that project was exhibiting virtual reality on the square to people who had never tried VR before. So in the course of that, I became enamored with this facility. This is kind of my entry into community media in general. So I'm learning a lot and being brought up to speed very quickly, but I'm helping OpenSignal launch an immersive media lab. So integrating game engine technology, which is also synonymous with real-time technology. And so that's my background, is as a digital artist working with this software, very easily seeing how it's going to have a profound impact on media production in the very near term. In fact, it already is. And so it's different from 360 video or video for virtual reality, because it deals with computer generated environments. And then the merger of CGI environments with real filmed live actors. So with green screen studios. So I'll tell you more how that works in the course of things, but that's a little bit about how I got here.
Hi, my name's Sandy Cioffi, and I would probably be most known as a documentary filmmaker up until about 5 years ago, when I first experienced what was an intersection of journalism and gaming by an artist named Nani De La Pena, and it was in beta form. And I had just finished a documentary in the Niger Delta where my greatest urges as a filmmaker were to bring you with me and have you bear witness. And for a variety of reasons, it was a highly imperfect process. And I would say after that, I felt pretty certain I wasn't going to make long-form documentary again, partially because of how many years and how many resources. And I got really interested in transmedia and storytelling across an ecosystem as less of an auteur. And as soon as I went inside what I previously had only thought of as first-person shooter games, which meant I had a predisposition for hating the headset and assuming that it would be another way to train the back of your brain to be more afraid. And, you know, I went right there right away as a longtime professor and media literacy advocate, and I got worried. But as soon as I experienced someone whose intention was to bring an audience and put them inside a street corner in Aleppo or a food line in Los Angeles. There's a very famous piece now called Hunger in LA made by this artist. And as soon as I experienced that, I knew that I wanted to dedicate my original urges as a documentary filmmaker and professor into what I see as our moment of transformation in yet another really epic intersection of technology, media, and a need for us to connect with those stories. So that is now, I left academia, and I'm now a party to a collective that's doing a creative exchange lab in Seattle, similar to what Matt's talking about. And this is happening all over the country really organically. People are feeling the urge to find a variety of ways to bring community media, public activism, public art, art and culture, economic development in very new and fresh ways together to do something about the gap between the power of this technology and most people's access to even understanding the framework. So that's me.
Cool. I'm Kathy Bisbee. How many of you have met me before or heard me speak at an ACM conference? A couple of you who are maybe not only from the Northwest. This is my first time at an ACM Northwest, so thanks so much for having me. I have spent the last 10 years of my career in community media in California, in 2 locations in California running community media centers, PEGs, both of them affected by DIVCA, which was 2006 legislation that took away all of our operating funds in California. So we had no funds at all for community media. And in my first 6 months as the brand new executive director, bless you, I had to figure out how do we come up with operating funds to make community media sustainable. And I'm not sure we figured out how to do that yet, 10 years later. But one of the things that really started for me 10 years ago was I began to think about how we could create a long-term sustainability plan. And a lot of that meant that we had to reinvent who we were, how we expressed the work that we did to the community, how we framed that work in more relevant 2018 terms. So some of you maybe have heard me speak at the national conferences on post-apocalypse PEG, because that's how I felt. I felt like we were really kind of the zombie apocalypse and trying to figure out how we were going to be sustainable. So my background, the first decade of my career was as a community organizer in California around environmental issues and also media reform and labor issues. The next 13 years was in technology, so I did a lot of work in the digital social networking and digital media, digital storytelling space, and then the last 10 in community media. And now I run Brookline Interactive Group, which is a community media arts center in Brookline, Massachusetts. We're surrounded on 4 sides by Boston, so we're completely isolated there, but we're basically Boston. And we, over 2 years ago now, started the Public VR Lab as a startup project inside of our community media center. So for the last 2 years, we've been offering classes in 6 different ways to teach VR, we call it XR, and we might want to get into a little bit of the terms later on because I don't know how familiar you guys are with all of the language. And if we can get my PowerPoint up, I do have some really clear descriptions of all that, so I want to make sure you guys are with us as we're describing some of these things. But I have a background in documentary film as well, so I also, like Sandy, saw the Syria piece, actually right before the New York Times put out a Google Cardboard in every single Sunday edition. About a month before that, I saw a piece about a 12-year-old Syrian refugee girl and took the headset off and was in tears. And even though I had seen something on a Google Cardboard 4 years prior to that, seeing it inside of an HTC Vive, where it was really room scale, volumetric, virtual reality, where I actually felt like I was on location at that refugee camp, really shifted for me, not only my documentary filmmaking work, but also what I thought we could do in community media. So the Public VR Lab is actually building a field for community VR. Just like community media did 35 years ago, we feel like the accessibility is really lacking in the VR space, and we feel like community media is really one of the organizations and networks of organizations around the country that is best suited to actually move community XR forward. So we have a whole bunch of tools that I'll tell you more about during the talk that can help you bring this to your media center and really be able to roll out some of these opportunities to reinvent yourself and reiterate the work that you're doing.
Thank you, everyone. This is such good stuff. I love it. Are there any questions just right out the gate or things that folks in the room want to make sure that we cover? Feel free to pop up. Here's a little microwave, microphone.
Pop into this microwave.
You in the back, come on up. Did you grab this?
Do you want to try to switch out?
Yeah, I put it on Gmail.
Okay.
What's your Gmail account?
Yeah, I guess I just want to know if you're going to talk about the different open source platforms or free platforms or different things that tools you can use to make the VR stuff and how you approach that, and terms of licensing and that kind of thing.
So open source and licensing. Oh, you
And also like with Unity, where you have to have licenses to use some of its stuff. And things like that.
Okay, cool. Hey, thank you.
Can you give me Sandy's? Sandy can put up my presentation, which has some definitions maybe for people, so that we don't get too far ahead of where some people are at. Sorry. Can I connect?
Do you have a port?
Yeah, I have a. I do. Yes. I
I
also have it on Google. If you just want to go and I can share it with you. That might be the easiest way. I need your email address. Send it to you.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not my computer, yeah.
This is
Yeah.
I'm just sitting in front of it.
You want me to just use that computer? Okay. That sounds easy. There we go.
This is the
Excellent.
computer for
Okay.
You can
for-
drive,
So
yeah.
while
I
we're
will
figuring that
drive.
out,
Excellent.
person that was asking that question about open source and Unity and licensing, were you also getting at how are we engaging with this technology outside of proprietary boundaries? Is outside of the corporations that are creating VR and AR? Okay.
Yeah, like I know there's like an open source VR SDK that you can get into, and also some VR stuff now.
I'm so sorry to ask you to come back up, but I know none of this is getting on the TV, and we might want to have it there because I think this is really valuable.
What was I saying? Oh, yeah, I know there's an open source like SDK for doing VR stuff. I think it's called like Open Views or something like that. And Godot is a 3D game engine that's completely open source. It's kind of like Unity, but it's under the MIT license, so you can actually totally do whatever to it. But those are free options that are harder to utilize sometimes and that kind of thing, where Unity is a little easier, but you have to go through hoops to maybe do some of the stuff organizationally. And I guess that's what I was wondering, if what your thoughts on that were.
Okay, so some of those trade-offs
Yeah.
and just identifying that these things are out there. Thank you, Andrew. Kathy, are you ready?
Nope. I
Okay,
think
well-
Matt could answer that probably really quickly, though, if you want to get into that.
I can speak to that. I'm kind of taking your question in terms of equity and accessibility, like what softwares, what solutions are out there that are either free or open source. It seems like an amazing moment right now because the two most used game engine softwares, Unity and Unreal Engine, are both free. They're free to use. They have been for a number of years now, and only now are they starting to try to monetize them by adding Plus and Pro versions. And that gives you access to certain features, but they're entirely unessential features. So they're really geared towards agencies and studios that are making games at a much higher level. And so the software's free. I personally would not advocate messing around with other open source versions that don't have a thriving community around them, because it's such rough territory to enter into as a novice anyways. You really need like that large user community, creating assets, posting on forums, answering all your questions through tutorials and all that. That being said, I would never discourage anyone interested in using this software from just downloading it. It's cross-platform, Mac or PC. Get it on your computer and you can start using it, and you can follow tutorials, and you'll within a night you can wrap your head around how powerful it is and also how creative and exciting it is. So Unity and Unreal Engine, both free. On the hardware side, there's OS VR, I guess, open source VR, and there's certain protocols, and you can order the different components, and you could build your own headset. And that's an interesting prospect, and maybe a solution for someone who can't afford one of the higher end headsets. But again, it's a real roll of the dice how well that's going to turn out. I would never personally go that route, but I also have a completely different story in terms of my access point with virtual reality.
And I feel like these are some teaser bits for you all, like who are ready for the jump to hyperspeed.
Yeah.
To get into what these options are and the nuances. Kathy, are you ready with your more like 101
Sure.
level?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And let me just, I want to address that too, though, because we use WebVR and as a platform for creating VR content that could be on the web. And one of the reasons we do that, that's one of the forms of VR that we're creating at our space. So we use Unity, we actually have a lot of different things that we're playing with, but WebVR and A-Frame, which is an overlay language, programming language that works over HTML, we like that because a lot of folks know HTML. A lot of older developers have had experiences with HTML, and it's an overlay language that works with JavaScript and HTML, and so it's a really accessible way. I hadn't coded for 20 years, and I did our hackathon a couple months ago, and I was able to put 360 video into a web VR format and have a web page that showed a VR experience and also play with the code myself to create like a little game within 4 hours. So that's a really accessible way to get introduced, and for a lot of your members, that's a really good onboard point. So just so that you have that. I'll talk a little bit about what VR is, just so that we can kind of bring everybody together here. The way that I usually break it down, VR is a really embodied cognitive form of media. So how many people have actually tried VR in this room? Okay. How many of you have tried it on either an Oculus or a Vive? Good. How many people have been on a Google Cardboard only? Okay, only. All right. So folks who haven't, raise your hands if you haven't tried VR yet. Okay, so I just want to make sure we explain to you what it feels like. And we actually have a couple of Vives. We're going to set them up during lunch. Matt has one and we brought one. We have a VR toolkit that we provide to media centers. It's on the back of your flyer if you're interested in finding out more. But we can do some demos with you guys so that you really get an experience, because until you've tried it, you kind of can't really talk about it. So come try it with us. This is how we usually break down VR. VR gets talked about as all of the things that fall under the VR umbrella. We are kind of calling it VR/XR right now because it's easier for people to understand VR than it is XR. But when we say XR, when you hear us say XR, it means all of these things that fall under the VR umbrella. So 360 is part of that. 360 video, in fact, the media is kind of hyped up as VR. So you'll hear people talk about VR and they might only be talking about 360 video. That's fine. There's lots of arguments in the industry. There's a whole hour-long podcast debating the linguistics and the semantics of this. But for now, all you need to know is that VR, XR, 360 video is part of that. 360 video is like putting a fishbowl over your head and you can see in every direction all around you, and it's really cool. But then there's volumetric VR, and that's actually like putting a fishbowl over your head and then being able to walk around the fishbowl and talk to the mermaid and talk to the sailor and talk to the fish and touch the fish, which is actually what my future mother-in-law is doing. She's 80-something woman originally from Lithuania, and she was saying, "Can I punch the fish? Can I punch the fish?" So that's, we do this a lot with seniors, and they love it because it's so experiential. They really feel like they're inside of the fishbowl and able to move around in the fishbowl. And in 2 instances, we've actually even seen people with physical limitations completely stop doing that inside of VR. So I talked with some of the caretakers for the seniors, and they really believe that once they're inside VR, they sort of forget that they have a physical body. And we could talk a lot. We could do a whole hour thing about the consciousness of VR and what that might mean for our physical limitations we currently have. But volumetric VR lets you move around in space. So usually people call that VR. And then augmented reality, AR, you probably hear about that a lot. It was Pokemon was kind of the first sort of killer app that lasted about 2 months, where people were walking off cliffs, chasing after little Pikachus and capturing them. So they had their phones up and they were looking for them, and they were able to sort of capture things in the air. And we've done a couple of AR projects as well that I'll tell you about how you can apply that to your local community. And then WebVR, we talked about a little bit just a few minutes ago, is an accessible way to get VR content and a VR experience onto a web browser, so you don't need a headset. You could actually just move around inside of a web browser, and it does require some technical challenges that we can tell you about if you're interested. There's also mixed reality. We can talk more about that, but I just want you guys to have kind of basis for understanding. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anybody have any questions about what VR is? Any confusion about the term so far? All right, cool.
Sandy, is this a good time for your presentation?
I don't know that we need to. I mean, I think all that's in there that might be useful is the project you were referring to, Project Syria. I actually have a clip of it.
Oh, cool.
So I'm thinking, let's pull that up, because so
How do I find that?
let's see, it's on the actual desktop, and it says something like Cioffi presentation 2018 or some.
Okay.
Yeah,
We can
there
toss
it is.
the computer back to Sandy.
Yep.
Oh,
Do you want me to find it? I
it's
just need
not a problem.
glasses
It's
to find it.
that one with the
Is it here?
the future man there. Yeah,
Cool.
that yeah. If you play from there, I
Cool.
can go blam right through to Project Syria. So there's Teatro Greco and a diorama and a ViewMaster, and those are all just there to augment the points being made. In addition to all those things, it's also stereoscopic. So in this simulated world, the phrase first came from a French playwright named Artaud, and it's virtual reality, and it just refers to all of the worlds, the simulated worlds we create. So for people who want to understand sort of where the basis in an analog, in immersive theater with everything all around you, it's that ancient a concept. And the ViewMaster is an early playing around with stereoscopic photography, where because we're mammals with two cameras on either side, Wayne's World, camera 1, camera 2, you end up having to balance yourself, which adds to the reason why you feel the embodiment being discussed. So partially because you cause your own sense of feeling where you are in the built environment, you balance. And so this is also in a 360 space. You can look everywhere, you can move everywhere, and as you said, if you have additional controllers and also computing power. So with all of these things, I know that some of what gets intimidating is each one represents new economics, which is what already came up right away, which makes perfect sense. I only put this here if anyone's a fan of this film or of this concept. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. There's this character plot line with Richard Dreyfuss's character, whose name I forget in the movie, where he is seeing the shape and he doesn't know what it's about, but he knows he has to change his whole life for it, and he sees it in the mashed potatoes. And essentially for me, that's what happened with virtual reality. I was mashed potato crazy, and now I've dropped everything to do it.
Right.
And this was the piece that did it to me. And this is the piece, by the way, that has done it to thousands of people. I can't tell you the number of times I meet a new person, I'm on a panel with them, and they refer to this as iconic. Yep. We all know that something got broken open here. This, on the left-hand side, what you see is a very early version of what became the Oculus Rift. And this was, that antenna is helping to place the person inside space. And part of the reason this effect is so affecting, even though the graphics are obviously very rudimentary in the beginning, because the computing power necessary to do this was a real demand at first. If you hit the spacebar again, it should play. So on the right-hand side, this is a recreation of what was primary source footage from a street corner in Aleppo. And you're hearing the real audio, which is on, but I don't know what happened, but it's okay. You're hearing the real audio. And inside this headset, as you move around, everything feels like it's moving with you. And when you sense that the bomb goes off, you're desperately looking for the girl. And when you watch a person from the outside doing it, every single time the bomb goes off in the story, you know it, because the people are frantically looking. And you all, I mean, for me anyway, you end up with this sort of rush of a sense of common humanity that I have not experienced in the dark in a movie in a very long time. And it struck me as the very thing that many of us had really been hoping to achieve. Oh yeah, thank you. Sorry, I only put that, we can skip that. That is just to talk about the math of it and why it works. That's about my last film. We can skip that. I just want to get to, I want to play one more. So on the left, just to say what's old is new again. This is something we've been working on as storytellers for a very long time. So there are all kinds of examples of full immersion experiments. This is from 1962. It was called the Sensorama. And when you would go in this dome and the story would play broadly around you, you would have fake senses come out. Esters, that's what they're called, right? Esters. And they might smell like peppermint or blah, blah, blah. Well, if you hit the, will you hit it again? Yeah, thank you. This is a modern version of it. There's a group of artists in Europe called the Feelies, which is named after Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And they have created, by using the software that you can make a video game with, they've created a sense machine that can send out a smell, a breeze, a rock of your chair, and you can line it up with a story. So I was taken on a journey in the Amazon inside a 360 headset, but my chair in this pod, sorry. So this is what I'm seeing inside my headset, and I'm hearing a story about why the Amazon is in danger, and I'm being led on this by the people who live there. And then, one more time. And then when they, this is the artist who was doing the senses the whole time. This is me crying like crazy, which I do all the time in VR, and then it fogs up. That's a problem we have to work on. I don't know about you, but I'm a big crier in the headset. I can't tell you what it's like to have experienced the story having held a hot cup of tea that smelled like matcha, have a breeze while my chair rocked in sync on the water. Nice. I'm like, okay, most certainly this is the Matrix, but couldn't it be, to be a real goober for a minute, couldn't it be the Matrix for good? Couldn't it? Could it please? So exactly. Essentially, I think that's, I'll leave it there. I'll leave it at could it please be the Matrix for good, because it sure is powerful at a quite extraordinary level.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sandy. Any reactions from the crowd? Yeah.
I have a question. I recently...
Can we get this to him?
I've recently, because of my granddaughter, viewed this movie called Ready Player One, and it's seems like it's a total VR type movie. How do you react to that? This is a technology that I want to say it can be used for framing that is I don't know, flashpoint that it's often used to tell us that there's kids being shot in Florida constantly, and constantly reminded of this kind of situation, so we're always on edge, and anyway.
I would love to address that. I mean, and Sandy May and Matt probably have some things they want to say about this too. One of the projects that I'll tell you a little bit more about is we have a national immigration storytelling project. It's the first that we know of immigration storytelling project in VR. And Matt's actually one of our partners here in Portland. We did a training on Thursday with 3 here, and we have 5 total in the Pacific Northwest, and we have 13 on the East Coast. So we're going out to their communities, and they're telling immigration stories in 360, and then we're bringing it into Unity, and we have a timeline in Unity from 1620 to 2018 to talk about all of the times that folks immigrated into the United States. And we're also going to talk about migration stories as well. So Native American stories and voices will be heard as part of this project. So one of the things that's come up in the collaborative on our calls once a month is that we want to make sure that we're being really careful and sensitive to re-triggering people or triggering people, because this is a really intense topic for people as they're talking about their immigration stories. People are afraid of being turned in or having ICE come to their door. So as filmmakers, what's both our responsibility and our obligation, and how do we make sure that we're not triggering folks? And I think that just like all media, it can get over sensationalized very quickly, right? So one of the things that we do, and I'm sure probably many of you do at your media centers, is provide media literacy training. And we actually got the domain a couple years ago, virtualliteracy.org, and we're building curriculum into our work and into our training programs around how is this a medium that's really different. And I have a lot of fears about this. I have hope. I have great hope. I think there's great promise in VR, and I also think that there's some really, really dark potential misuses and unethical problems with it. Anything that can make us cry inside of the media experience and really feel like we're physically there. I mean, we were in Africa presenting to the UN. We had an air pollution customized VR experience that we created for the United Nations, and we took to Nairobi, Kenya, and we had 800 world leaders and delegates come and try our tool. And it's a three-dimensional globe with all of the particulate matter for air pollution mapped onto each country on the globe, so you can see country by country analysis of what's happened over 35 years. And so we had all these people trying it, and we had this one fellow who was African. He came outside of the, took the goggles off, and he said to my partner, he said, there's an ocean under this tent. And we said, yeah, in the computer program, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing an ocean. You're inside of this ocean environment. You really feel like you're in the ocean. He said, no, underneath this tent at the UN, there is an ocean. And he believed so strongly that he was actually had X-ray vision and could see underneath the grass, and that there was an ocean underneath it. So think about that experience, and think about what it might be like for young people, for people who don't think critically, to be inside of VR with this very embodied cognitive experience, believing that they're actually somewhere. How do we teach people to know, like, hey, this is not actually real, but also we want you to kind of experience this in a real way? So how do we do that? And what's our obligation as media people, as journalists, as storytellers, as trainers, to make sure that people understand the possible ramifications of that? The other challenge is around augmented reality, and there's a great example last summer, this game similar to Pokemon Go called Candy Crush in Michigan, used a city park and didn't bother to tell the city Parks and Rec. It seems like an episode of Parks and Rec to me, but the recreation director gets there Monday morning and the place is trashed. People been there all weekend. There were no porta potties. They didn't get a permit because it's in augmented reality, so they didn't think they needed a reality permit for the park. And so the parks director actually sued the augmented reality company, and they lost. So the recreation department lost the case. The company won. So this is a real issue too. What are our rights in augmented reality as the public? I mean, that's why we're working in the public interest in XR and VR, because we want to make sure that the public interest is represented, just like we do that in the community airwaves and cablecast and creating physical space in our communities. We also want to do that in the virtual space as well. And if we don't articulate that now at the beginning of this industry, we will lose in the long run. And the corporate powers will continue to manipulate media like they always have, unless we're speaking up as community media, especially, I think, and saying we need to create space for the public and for the public interest in these common areas inside of augmented reality and virtual reality.
I think that that's a perfect segue to go into talking about the nuts and bolts of how you can do this at your media center. What are the initial conditions you need in place, and how can you structure things, especially keeping equity in mind and making sure that with this opportunity to bring new technology into your spaces and new ways of doing some things, that from the beginning you're thinking about structural equity.
Yep. Do you want me to should I do any of my presentation?
Do you have some presentation on that?
Well, I prepared a PowerPoint just like Sandy, so I wasn't sure if you wanted me to jump in or if Matt wanted to jump in.
Matt hasn't talked for a bit.
Yeah.
Matt, do you want to talk about some of the things you've been thinking about here in Portland as you've pulled together the Portland presence for this?
Mm-hmm. With respect to...
You might be able to interrupt the network if you want.
That's okay.
No? Okay,
I don't have any visuals. So Sabrina, you and I were talking yesterday on the phone about the importance of media literacy. Sort of VR and AR open up this whole new echelon of media literacy and ethical questions, right? So Kathy just mentioned some of them. I would add that as this technology evolves, things like eye tracking and even sensors within the headset that will sense the heat coming off your skin or the tension on your skin, those will all serve a functional purpose for improving your experience and improving your ability to have social experiences within VR. So on the one hand, it's going to be very useful, and there's going to be a tremendous demand for those sorts of nuances to the technology. But obviously that opens up a bunch of freaky questions about who's managing that data, right? Who's mining that data? Who has access to it? Most of us have heard about the situation with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. So there's obviously some serious dialogue that needs to be happening right now. And Mark Zuckerberg being summoned to Washington was an indicator that, okay, this is actually reaching the public's awareness, but not all these nuances of the VR, AR questions that are going to crop up in the next 3 to 5 years. So talking with Sabrina yesterday, like, why shouldn't media centers like the ones we all represent be kind of the locus of conversation, leadership, and advocacy, setting the stage for those sorts of conversations to occur, and then actually, putting into action through workshops and things like that, ways we can, take these questions and concerns to the local or city government, and also just, in the sort of classic sense of media literacy, just like educate people, show them how to protect themselves against the sort of data mining that goes on, the privacy issues that crop up when you just use social media. Because social media is hot on VR and AR. They're trying to get us all enmeshed in that world so that they can continue to do what they're doing right now with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, which is learning as much as they possibly can about us so that advertisers can manipulate us. Not to paint too dystopian a picture, but that's what's going on. There absolutely needs to be some form of regulation around this inevitably, because as Kathy points out, when it's a new emergent technology, the law isn't yet equipped to deal with it. Hence the situation of the park in Boston, or wherever that was. They lost the case because it's like, well, we didn't know this is an experiment. Yeah. So we're very much at that phase, and these centers are the perfect place to have that sort of dialogue happening, and it should happen soon.
It seems so clear during I don't know if any of you watched the Facebook hearings with Zuckerberg, but I just sat there chomping at the bit going, oh my God, why aren't you asking him these questions? And it's because they don't understand the platform of the technology.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I think it's really important, just like we did with PortaPacks, back 35 years ago, we helped people understand the technology. We trained them on the technology. We provided a really easy entry point for people to be able to use the technology for the public good. And we also helped create dialogues about the technology and why these things were important, why bridging the digital divide is important. That's totally started at libraries and municipalities and community centers and senior centers and community media centers. I mean, this is really just translating that into the VR space.
I just wanted to add a quick note before you went to this. In addition to what you said about Zuckerberg being summoned to Congress is an important story. Before that, he felt summoned to hover over Puerto Rico in a headset. And I thought that got so little ink, and it felt like such an important part of the story to me, because what I'm referring to is at Facebook's annual conference, he did a demonstration of the newest capabilities of the Oculus as a place you can be social in virtual reality. And as you're saying, there can be some extraordinary communities collaborating about how to run their water systems. I mean, we can talk about amazing applications for this. Doctors learning things. Well, everybody talks about doctors, by the way, when they want to talk about VR and good, which makes us very suspicious at some point. But what he wanted to do to show this capability is that he had the audience go with him to hover over parts of Hurricane Maria destroyed Puerto Rico with an avatar with him. So he's hovering physically in the headset as an avatar, surveying the scene as if that's a way to do what we're talking about in terms of using these technologies for a new kind of storytelling and connection across community. And it just reminds me to make the point that with everything we're saying, and I really appreciate you bringing up this notion of who owns the parks, who owns the public space, who owns the virtual public space. As it is, we are already not looking at the importance of data as a real thing in community organizing. And so I wanted to make the connection that his urge to hover there is just as much a 20th century problem as it is a new technology problem, and that most certainly before anyone gets too overwhelmed by the tech, which always happens, that we remember that the failures of teaching humanities, having spaces where we already dealt with equity at a meaningful level, all of those things are really the problem. Yeah. They're not the technology. The technology is obviously a massive accelerant right now. That's for certain. But I know one of the solutions, like when you were saying the sophistication of heat mapping and retinal tracking can really scare you. But then I got a chance to do a demo of a new glove that can make you feel like a spider is crawling on your hand, or there's cold or hot. And as you experience it and then you see artists messing with it, you recognize that a lot of times when we get to these inflection points, one of the major cures are artists intervening to make all kinds of pieces quickly to get them out to people to understand the language. And I do see people racing to do centers like yours, which to go to what you've been doing. This is the answer. And we should not lose out our urge to fix all the things you've talked about that we've already fixed. And it just keeps accelerating.
I would add too that I think as community media centers, we are more about solidarity than we are about charity. And I think this has been, for me as a community organizer in the tech and media space, I didn't go work on documentaries in Latin America to tell their story. I went to make sure they got to tell their story. And I think we understand that collectively as community media. We understand how to not take an avatar to Puerto Rico. We work with Puerto Rico folks in our community to talk about, hey, what's going on for you, and let them tell their story and make sure that their voices are amplified, right? Instead of putting ourselves out there, we're often pushing them forward to help support them in telling their own stories, which is so much more authentic than what corporate media can ever do. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity for us to be in that space. And the good news is that the industry is a little bit slowed down in certain ways. People call it the trough of disillusionment with VR, which I love. There's a lot of experimental stuff. A lot of people race to get little samples of things out to the market. And a lot of folks in Boston and in the tech community are talking to me, and we experienced this too. We did a lot of things last year to see what we could make happen, and it was really exciting. And now we're thinking about, okay, how do we get funding for this? How do we sustain this long term? And that's the same thing the corporate VR people are trying to figure out too. So there's this, I feel like there's this little bit of probably a 2-year time frame, maybe 18 months. And all the data is saying that, by 2020, 30% of people will have headsets. And I just saw some data 2 days ago that totally dismissed that and said it's more like by 2019 it'll be 5.2%, which is nowhere close to 30. So that's good for us because it gives us time to build capacity at our media centers and think about how we can come up with these public interest applications. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to jump into the quick little prezi here. Does anybody have any questions?
I have one question.
Mike, please.
Mike, please. Or on the mic.
I have one question.
Thank you.
So I hear about art and I hear about documentaries and I hear about the social and that kind of side of it. And from my little dip into it, I know it's exceptionally complicated and it's not really an amazingly easy thing to kind of dive into quickly, which I understand. But we have a bunch of engineers who are building this stuff. Do you know how people like us, and more directly people like you, can create that feedback loop with those engineers who are just going to be working in a vacuum? Sorry, engineers. But how do we influence them to make things that are going to be easier and better for us to achieve what you all are so wonderfully starting out on?
You're more of an engineer.
Well,
I think.
Scarcely. I'm more of an artist, and I'll do what I have to do to utilize the tools. But I'm not a coder. Code is just becoming legible to me. So, yeah, I think that, again, advocacy is huge. I would look to the sort of organic food movement as a reference point. You need to build an awareness in the public so that they create the demand for what the technology companies are making. And partly how I see that working is there's these Silicon Valley heretics is what they've been called. Basically, it's former tech workers that worked at a very high level at, say, Google or Facebook. One of them is Tristan Harris, and he was given a very significant platform in the New York Times to just kind of talk about his disillusionment with what the situation we're all in with social media, and how he doesn't take pride in the fact that he actually created the like button. Okay, so Tristan Harris and a number of others have really come forward. First of all, they left those companies. Conveniently, I think they have millions of dollars to start a new life with. But they really feel like we've reached a sort of crisis point. And if they feel that way, I'm more inclined to feel that way. And people have different views and experiences of using social media. But they've gone on to kind of band together. They've created a website similar to what you're talking about, Kathy, and there needs to be more of these, and maybe they could unite in some sense online. But I think it's called humanetech.org. So I would definitely look into that. And basically it's a resource about this is what's going on. These are the ways in which social media technologies have evolved. Social media, I'm just using that as a catch-all. That's going to be virtual worlds. Like virtual and augmented reality might be hard to accept now, but people are going to be convening virtually through telepresence within the next 5 to 10 years, like prolifically. And social media companies know that. So they want to get us all, keep us enmeshed in the platforms that we're currently using, and then smoothly transition to allow for virtual and augmented reality headsets. But yeah, I think just making people aware, creating the awareness so that the public is not going to put up with crappy EULA clause agreements that no one takes the time to read, and that's obviously not a good way to address these issues. There needs to be transparency, and we have to demand that transparency.
Can I add something to that question? I wanted to say, I know that we've been speaking about a lot of the work that looks as though it's impossible to know how to view it or make it, but there are cameras that cost $200 that shoot in 360. This is an incredible camera, actually. I shot a piece where we rode crew with it, and it took a real beating, and the footage was amazing. So that camera is $350, I think?
It's actually $500. This is the Nikon Key Mission.
Yeah.
So it's a very durable camera. We had one of our immigration colleagues said that she jumped off a 2-story building into a lake and was able to swim with it, and it was totally fine. The lens is actually underneath these. There's 2 180 lenses. The lens is actually underneath the glass, so it's pretty well protected. We've had interns drop it constantly.
And instead of worrying about having to learn, you don't even have to learn complex software to use it.
Nope.
So there really are ways to start using them. And I think using them with young people in particular, if you're in education, is really great, because thinking in this way is step one. Yep. To just come back to, again, it's not about the headset, it's not about the gaming necessarily, but it certainly is about what we would call near-field, immersive story, media, communication, and spatial computing. It's about the increased world in which the device that's the intermediary won't be necessarily visible to you. And so if it's environmental or spatial computing world, we want to know we've all prepared ourselves to get there, but I wouldn't want people to think that you have to be able to make the piece on the Amazon in order to play in this world.
You can really start with the 360. You start in 360, and I'm going to show you a couple of pieces that we created at our media center. We have a budget of $650,000. We actually we're a PEG, and we have 27 after-school programs and a job training program for high school students. We cover 700 government meetings, and we still had a way to figure out how to bring this public VR lab into our organization as a startup project. And we're a lot of people call us and ask us, hey, how can I start one at my media center? We're totally excited about you taking the equipment, taking what we've done, and creating it in your community, in whatever way works in your community. So if I can, I'd love to show just a quick video about what we've done over the last 2 years. And I'll go really fast through the slides, but I want to give you guys a sense of what that pathway might look like for you.
Mm-hmm.
a highlight of my career. So you guys probably saw a little bit in there of some of the projects that we've been doing over the last year. So this is our ever-evolving mission statement. I have a Google Doc with like 13 of these because over the past 2 years, things have changed a lot in the industry. Even in the past 2 months, I've changed our mission statement a couple times. But so we started with teaching classes. We started with teaching 360 classes. We used the Ricoh, and then now we're using the Nikon Key Mission. We're buying these in bulk, and actually on the back of the flyer that I hung out, we have a VR toolkit, and you can see all of the equipment that we've put into a Pelican case. We took 4 of them to Africa with us to the UN, and they handled it. They were beat up a little, but they're really solid. And then we also provide an hour of free tech support for you. And then Boston Neighborhood Network and PhillyCam actually have been 2 of the first purchasers of our toolkits. And we're now starting a community VR users group so that, and we'll probably meet in AltSpace actually, or Mozilla Hub, which just got announced yesterday. Mozilla is an awesome resource actually for lots of things in the public good and accessibility in general. So we'll be doing a users group for community VR inside of the social VR spaces so that you guys could jump in. You could come in on a web browser. You don't need a headset, and you could just learn from all of the folks who are now adopting community VR and toolkits at their media centers. But we did an eco hackathon. So we started our classes in fall of 2016. And we started a meetup group. We're working with Boston VR. So I'd really recommend that as one of your first sources for how to connect. I mean, Matt's a great example. He is an immersive person an artist who then got involved with a community media center and then made a lab happen and starting to build the classes and all of these opportunities. We didn't have that inside our capacity either. So we had to sort of go to Boston VR and places where we could find folks who were really interested in the same things that we were and bring them into our center. So pretty much we now have 3 of our staff have for the last year been teaching Unity and VR Doodler and Symmetry, which are a little kind of WYSIWYGs a little bit for creating VR content. We also teach Blender, which we were already teaching anyway for one of our computer classes that we offered. So that's also having some kind of 3D modeling and content creation program. Then we had this eco hackathon focused on climate change, and we got 16 different businesses and organizations to sponsor it. We got Teach for America on board. We just went to everyone. I mean, I literally was chasing after everybody I could find to direct message on Twitter and say, hey, will you sponsor this? Will you sponsor this? And we raised a little bit of funds for that. and we had 150 registrants come sign up, and we had 3 winning teams, and they created, some of them were actually learning code on the 3 days of the hackathon to figure out how to make something that would work in a Microsoft HoloLens, to learn web VR. We had over 22 mentors. We just pulled in from our community and went out and got people to come in and create a partnership with us. And like anything really good that we do, we're, I think, a great community hub for media and technology in our community. So why not go out, get people, and then see what you can create together. That was one of the things that we created. And this is me in high fidelity with my partner, my fiance now. So that's social VR. That's what it would look like. You could also create clothing and all kinds of clothing.
It's the default avatar.
It's the default avatar, yeah. And there's a augmented reality example for you. Does everyone watch that? See, cool. I'm gonna skip through these, but here's some of the programs that we've created in the last 2 years. So we have coding programs. We have civic hackathons that we've done. We do a hackathon every single month for the last year and a half. So we have folks from Boston VR come in, and people create cool things all weekend. We have equipment checkouts, so you can come in. We do a 3D, you saw probably the guy with the creepy looking 3D scan of himself. I have one of those in me, really scares my mom. She's like, oh, because it's hollow in the inside, so you can kind of see, you can 3D scan someone. We're doing a civic engagement project, so the Hopes and Dreams project that you saw, we invited people last January to come in from the community and tell us their hopes and dreams. And in January, very liberal community in Massachusetts, people had a lot to say, so it was a great way to get people to come in. They came in, and all we used for that was a DSLR with a white background. And then we stitched them all together in Premiere. So these are all tools you guys have at your disposal. You could have people come in, you could have them, as we're already doing anyway, right, talk about what they want for their community, facilitate a dialogue, and then put them into web VR, was what we use for that. And then people can go inside of a headset and actually look at each person and optically control who's talking. So that was a good way of connecting. We have I think you might have seen the museum, all of the civic artwork and monuments. We got a small grant from the town of Brookline to go out and 360 photograph and video all of the town monuments and public art. So this is something you guys could use that as an opportunity for your municipality and say, hey, wouldn't you love a 360 tour for people who are unable to get out and see some of these things in our community? You can bring sort of the old time. We have a 80 plus year old senior who comes in, who his name is Elmer, and he's creating the voiceover about all of these monuments, and he's working with our 14, 15-year-olds in the high school job training program who are learning AR Kit, and we're going to have an AR augmented reality hologram of a Revolutionary War soldier standing at the monument next to you. When you go out, you can see him with your phone, and it'll be Elmer talking to you about the history of these municipal monuments in our community. So that's a good use case to talk to your community about why you might want to implement this. And you can get also artists creating residencies and fellowships. Instead of calling them interns, we're calling them fellows, which is a really good way to get sort of people with a little bit higher level skills who may not be the traditional intern or volunteer, and they can then have a fellowship or residency, an artist residency with your organization. We do demos. We've done demos the first year we did demos twice a week for the whole year, which was crazy. And then the second year we've been doing it just once a week. People come into our facility and they try VR in our theater, and they watch each other do VR. We have parties and staff trainings and fun days for all of the town departments, which is a great way to build relationships with your town because they love bringing their staff over to try something cool and new. We have our senior center that we've gone out and done events with, and it's really great. Even the Parks and Rec department, we've been doing classes with them as well for seniors on movement. So they can actually get some exercise inside of VR. They can also travel the world through Google Earth, and so that's a great way for people who are not as mobile. They can go fly over Florence or Rome, and they love that. The seniors in our community really, really love that, as do the teens. 50% of our incoming traffic last year in 2017 came in because of VR. So this is a great way to sort of reframe and reiterate the work that you're doing in media and technology with something that is really hot right now and people are really interested in, but it's also a great way to create content that can serve your community's needs as well. And these are the projects that I was mentioning. This is our training that we did. We did a 360 filmmaking training in Philly for about 12 folks there. And now they have a toolkit and they're doing trainings and they're taking it out to their community. And this is a little bit about, this is the project that we took to the UN that I was mentioning, the data project with the particulate matter. We partnered with a for-profit organization that's creating VR content in WebVR, and we co-produced this for them for the UN so we could show them a use case for VR storytelling around global environmental issues. So, and then that's it for me.
Thank you, Kathy.
Very cool.
Is the slideshow online?
It is online at Sketch because I was just at the National Digital Inclusion Alliance and I just posted it for them, but I'm happy to post it up on publicvrlab.com as well. Yeah, I'll do that now.
Does anyone else have questions about the nuts and bolts of doing this at your center? Andrew, come on up. Get the mic.
So yeah, I guess my question was, if you implement a system like this at your center, how many units do you actually have to have around? Because like, if you have one, then like it's like one person at a time kind of thing. So how's that panned out?
You guys want to talk about that?
Well, in general, one of the challenges of engaging with this medium is that the number of people that you can have experience it and the economics of that are really difficult. So I've run some events and I'm working right now to set up a space at the Pacific Science Center in Seattle. And part of the goal of that space will specifically be so that pieces that are not the gaming world, not necessarily considered tech or even utilitarian, but very much art and culture driving back to the engineers, like the pieces we hope the engineers will engage with and that they'll then want to work on when they go to the VR AR meetup group. But we have what we would call a throughput problem in terms of how many people can engage at once. I would say that I've seen lots of different ways of getting better and better at it, although it's still a challenge. But just like any educator or someone running events, you can find ways to meaningfully engage people in why it's interesting. I mean, just like Disney manages to get you to wait an hour, you know, in the line for 2 hours, and there are immersive experiences along the way. As someone running experience design, you can engage people in why immersive matters and why we're doing this, even though they're not in the headset. That would be what I think, because we're so far behind in the thinking anyway, that we should look at it as a challenge of how we engage the public in a way to feel powerful and inspired in this, and not, you know, sort of thrown back on their heels by it.
I really want to make the point that this is a paradigm shift in media creation in general. Yeah. It's so much bigger than virtual reality headsets or augmented reality headsets. Yeah. Exactly. All the software that we're talking about, Unity, Unreal Engine, Blender. Blender is also free. It's a 3D modeling software. We're talking about 3D creation tool sets, and you can output that to traditional video. So you can point it at a VR headset, you can point it at YouTube or Vimeo, you can live project it, you can green screen a background, middle ground, and foreground, create an immersive theater set for a live actor in a studio like this. So I like to take up opportunities not to focus on just VR and AR, which is very exciting and very, you know, you don a headset, you try a good, well-crafted experience, you're going to be excited and transformed, and you're going to get it. That's part of the problem, is there's a few tiers at which people are experiencing VR, and there's a very bottom tier, and it's kind of like, okay, I don't get what all the hype's about. But beyond all that stuff, these sort of software and hardware technology solutions for creating media are what's coming. So of course they're going to integrate and be prolific at facilities like this. So everyone should take that away, and everyone should be asking questions about 360 immersive video and game engine technology, otherwise known as real-time technology, because it's a huge paradigm change that's happening right now.
And I would argue that we might want to get rid of the term game engine. I hear a lot of people talking about game engine, and I think that does a little bit of a disservice to VR because people, if they think of it as a game, it's a niche, right? But if we think of it as a programming language, Unreal and Unity, that's being used to create games, VR storytelling, and VR experiences and XR experiences, I think it broadens the reach of VR in general. Just,
I think that's a great point to make. And just to understand the trajectory of it, it's a game engine because this was traditionally used to design video games, okay, in 3D. But what it really means is it does graphics processing in real time, which is a huge revolution for computer-generated imagery, because previously you hear about long render times, right? It completely disturbs and makes the creative process painstaking, because you do an iteration of something you're working on, and then you're like, all right, render. 4 hours later, you have a chance to look at what you did and be like, all right, I'm going to change this, 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 and this. Go back, change in the software, render again. So real-time graphics is the point we've reached where graphics cards and computers are powerful enough that you can be working on a creative project and you can just be constantly pressing play and generating a simulation that you're working on, and it shows you exactly what you're looking at. Okay, that's a revolution.
Can I just say part of why that matters so much, that it's unfortunate that most of the investment in that thus far hasn't been for this reason, but now that we can do that, you could, for example, look at 10 different models for how to deal with a mobility problem in a particular city. You could put into what I've heard some people call a reality engine, which I'm uncertain of to some extent, but at least I think it's broadening. Your point being we have to broaden and understand what it is. And what it is and why we could love it is rapid simulations of solutions is something we obviously need very badly. But the majority of what we've done thus far hasn't been that. So that, to the really wonderful point that I think there's a bit of a window because commerce hasn't sorted out what to do, because it's quite possible that what this thing's best at isn't necessarily supposed to be about commerce. But while that question gets sorted, there's a little bit of a moment for community media and existing networks to jump on this. And part of that is to get the why. That you don't have to love what you think of the tech, but this notion of what we can do with it is really amazing.
I would, just to answer, I know part of what you were asking is how many units you should have at your facility.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that.
No, this is, I love this conversation. I didn't want to jump in until you guys are kind of wrapped, because that was really good. If you got this flyer for me, so it looks like this, and on the back is our toolkit. So we have, right now we have 3 at our facility, but we're also hosting a lot of events. We've been doing this for 2 years. I would suggest just getting 1. And I personally prefer the Htc Vive. I've also talked with their CEO, their US CEO, and they're amazing in terms of, I mean, I actually, when I hung up the phone with Rickard, I wanted to work for him immediately. Like the level of work that they're doing in the public interest is so amazing. And so that's, for me, really important in a company that I can feel good about reselling their product. But I also feel like the quality is a lot higher. Oculus is more popular because they were technically first out, but actually the Vive shipped first. And that's part of why we got one. We pre-ordered it in January 2016 because we wanted to be able to have access to a volumetric experience. So we use the HTC Vive. We also just got a Vive Pro, which is the new one. That's pretty cool too. But the differences are, you could start with a basic Vive that comes in our toolkit, or buy it yourself. We're actually passing on the bulk discounts that we get from Vive and from the Nikon distributor. We're passing those on to you. So we get a couple $100 off. It's not much. And then we custom cut all of the Pelican case for you, so you don't have to do it. And we ship it, and we just send you the package and then provide support. So we don't care if you buy it from us or not. I'm not here to sell these, but if you do, it helps us support other media centers who can't afford it. So we have a sliding scale. So if you're a media center that has a larger budget, we ask you to pay a higher rate so that we can support it and subsidize it for media centers like my former media center in California that lost all of its funding, right? So we're trying to do that. HTC Vive has VR for Good, VR for Impact, which they put $10 million towards VR for Impact projects in the public good. Also, Oculus has VR for Good as well. So there are a lot of these folks doing that kind of good work. But for us, we kind of went with the Vive. So we have it set up anywhere we go. We always ask for an HDMI display, like a big screen, because part of VR is it's so fun to watch your friends like try to do a Richie's plank experience at 24 stories high and watch them. We actually have a physical plank that we put in the office, and people walk across the plank. And we had a guy fall on us at NDIA in Cleveland last week. He actually fell. I've never seen that happen. So you do always need a spotter. Like, do not leave people alone inside of a headset, because if they're thinking this is a real experience, they're going to react that way. With seniors, with people who have vertigo. I have vertigo, and I've only been sick in 1 or 2 experiences. So you want to have something that they can touch, like a wall or a table or something that will be close to them, so that they can connect, with reality too. So, but we do have a theater where we display it, and anytime we do a demo, we have a visual display as well. So you don't need more than one headset if people can engage on that level.
So we have 1 more minute to go. Matthew, do you have something pressing? Please.
So community media centers, for lack of anyone who watches this and might offend them, are not always the most forward-thinking operations when it comes to boards of directors and some EDs. With your experience of launching this, and Massachusetts is also not the most forward-thinking state when it comes to branching out of traditional PEG. I'll wrap it up. What have you experienced? What would be your lessons for moving this forward in our own centers?
Show them. Really. That is bottom line. Show people. Don't tell them, just like good documentary work, right? Mm-hmm. Show them. Bring them into your studio. Offer them something for free. Have them have fun watching it with their peers, and they will be begging you to do it again and giving you money. That's what happened with our town. That's what happened with other community members. That's what happened with my board. Although I still have to tell my board over and over again, why are we doing this? Right. But show them. Show them a use case for it in your community. Show them how excited young people are about it, and tell them, look, this is a way of extending our community media mission into the VR space. If we don't go there, somebody else will. And they'll go elsewhere and not come into our media center because somebody else has those tools already and is creating immersive storytelling in these tools. So we should be doing that, not universities, not libraries. If libraries are doing it, there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing it.
Okay, thank you. So here we have 3 great examples of different ways to go about this. An organization that started this within their PEG station, from the outside, and also from the outside but coming into a PEG station. So I encourage you to talk with folks afterwards. Thanks for
And we're going to do demos.
We're going to do demos,
Yes.
yeah.
We are.
In here.
In here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. During lunch. Yep.
Brief respite. Yeah.
Please.
Do we want help? Do we want help clearing out the room? Because we're going to need to move these chairs. So how's that going to work?
Yeah, we probably
We're gonna-
give people a few minutes, because
Okay.
I think people might have questions for you.
Yeah.